We've had a couple of conversations at the Something to Talk About at the Senior Center, obviously, about the various aspects of COVID. One of the things that, as it becomes clear, this is going to be a virus that we're going to live with for quite a while, is that not only is there going to be unlikely some sort of silver bullet vaccine that's going to show up as a Christmas present this year, but that we will probably be needing to treat people with a variety of different approaches. So I asked Steve Bice and Andrea Chymiy, who have been a part of these conversations in the past, to return. Steve is the retired director of Strategic National Stockpile Division and Division of Emergency Operations at the Center for Disease Control, and he serves currently on the Bainbridge Medical Reserve Corps as part of its leadership team. Dr. Chymiy is a family physician at Pacifica Medicine here in Kitsap County, and she is a coordinator for the Medical Reserve Corps. And so obviously these folks have some firsthand knowledge of these kinds of challenges. And I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us for a little while today to give us some perspective, not only on the idea of a vaccine, but on therapeutics. And I know that, Steve, you have a lot of experience through the CDC on how to review treatments. And so I wonder if you might start us off today.
Okay, sure. Let me just begin by kind of a vaccine development 101, a little bit of a background. There are several phases to developing a vaccine, the first being the exploratory phase. And it involves basic lab research, usually lasts 2 to 4 years, usually. Scientists identify the natural and synthetic antigens. Currently, I can tell you there are over 250 therapies and 95 vaccines related to coronavirus, not COVID-19, but in general, coronaviruses are being explored worldwide. So that's the exploratory phase. Remember, 2 to 4 years. The preclinical stage, most vaccines developed in the research phase are tested on animals to see if they produce an immune response. Normally, this stage lasts for 1 to 2 years. That's in addition to the 2 to 4 in the exploratory phase. In this particular stage, called the preclinical, the ways to administer the vaccine, either through a spray in the nose, usually needles and syringes in the arm, but there are other ways of administering vaccines as well. That's discovered and tested during this preclinical stage. You might have heard of challenge studies. That's where they vaccinate an animal and then expose the animal to the disease to learn what happens. Again, that's 1 to 2 years, preclinical stage. Then the clinical development has phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Phase 1 is a limited number of humans, maybe 20 to 100, usually in the United States anyway, 20 to 100, healthy volunteers raise their hand, arm, and they get vaccinated. And the researchers ascertain the type and the extent of the immune response in folks. This trial stage usually takes 2 to 3 months. Then phase 2 trials, a candidate vaccine is tested on several hundred people. Volunteers are segregated according to their age and as an absolutely minimum criterion. Again, the vaccine safety is further studied. During this phase, we try to determine immunogenicity, proposed doses, schedule of immunizations, and methods of delivery. This stage can take months to years, literally. Phase 3, thousands of people are vaccinated in double-blind studies with actual vaccine and a placebo used. All the effects on the candidates that are vaccinated are articulated, safety profiles are developed. Phase 4 is optional for some vaccines, and we won't have a COVID-19 go through phase 4 because it's continued testing of the vaccine for safety. What's going to happen after we finish with phase 3 trials is it will go national, and we will continue to look at the safety profiles as it's actually being given. There are a few more stages, if you can believe, normal progression of vaccine development. The approval stage. Approval is requested from FDA if the phase 3 trials or phase 4 trials prove successful with a strong safety profile. This stage can take up to a year normally. Then there's the manufacturing process. Capacity requires, boy, I'll tell you, significant financial commitment on the part of the company that's making it. Personnel, equipment, quality assurance, quality control methodologies, all overseen in the most stringent way possible. The manufacturing process can last from months to a year. And then there's the distribution. So distribution of the vaccine, does it require refrigeration in the field? Are there going to be using pre-filled syringes, single-dose vials, multi-dose vials, needles required for different persons of different ages? How many doses are required to receive or to gain immunity? And that just gives you a little bit of a background for how long it normally takes. We are truly seeing something around the world that is phenomenal. A vaccine for a newly discovered disease, perhaps available as soon as Christmas time. My gut tells me that in the United States, we're going to be a little more, we'll be a little safer in our approach than some countries might be. And we will probably have our vaccine in the arms of most of us who I am viewing on this screen by early spring of 2021.
Now, that's an amazing, based on the timeline you just described, that's an amazingly speedy operation. Obviously, there are going to be concerns about safety in that kind of a scenario. How does it compare to any other historical, like what comes to mind, smallpox to me, might be the closest?
Well, the way smallpox was developed is, we won't get into it, but it was drastically different than the way this vaccine is being developed, and the way modern vaccines are being developed.
Oh, okay. So
it's really apples and oranges. It's very difficult to compare, but smallpox vaccine took quite a while, nonetheless. And you all lived through the swine flu program, and you remember that it was out on the street in the arms, and then we discovered the safety profile was challenged by the Guillain. Do you remember this? Guillain-Barré syndrome. That caused a real national hiccup in the administration of the vaccine, and it was pulled shortly after that for two reasons. First, because of Guillain-Barré. But secondly, because swine flu didn't mature the way we had perceived it to mature. We thought it was going to be much more deadly than it actually turned out to be. So it was pulled, and the program ended. So I don't want to be dramatic, but we could see a hiccup in the first vaccine that hits the market here in the US. We could see a profile glitch. We could see something happen. It wouldn't be unusual. And I know that that's not something we need to spend much time on. And I wouldn't, I don't want to, again, I don't want to be dramatic about it, but that vaccine will be evaluated every day in every arm that it goes into.
There's also, you guys, decreased requirements for this vaccine. I don't know the standard effectiveness that we require, but for the COVID vaccine, they're requiring it to be at least 50% effective, and that's it, which means we could get a vaccine quickly that is only 50% effective. So it just may not work as well. Hopefully it works in the target groups that really need it, like older persons.
Yes, internationally, the benchmark is at 60%, but we're climbing a very, very, very large hill at this point. And if 50% is what we get, what that means is not that 50% of the people who are vaccinated will be immune and 50% won't. What it means is that if Reed is vaccinated and I'm vaccinated on the same day, we both may catch the virus. But the results for both of us will be better than it would have been had we not gotten the vaccine. In other words, we probably won't have to be hospitalized. And then we can talk about ancillary or supporting therapies that would deal with Reed's infection and my infection in this makeup scenario.
Yeah, I'll talk about that next.
Yeah.
So Reed, do you want? Yeah. Oh yeah. Do you want to have people ask questions at the end after I talk about treatments, or do you want?
I think let's have you describe sort of obviously that 50% scenario that Steve just mentioned means that even if people get the vaccine, they may need therapies. And of course, there's also the question of how long it's going to take before we have an effective vaccine. And obviously, there's been a lot of people who are working on how to treat people who are sick now. And so we're starting to learn more about what kinds of therapies might be available. So let's go through that.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. Okay, good. So yeah, I mean, the way we were hoping to defeat this thing is to prevent it, but also to be able to treat it effectively. If we have awesome treatment, we don't need a perfect vaccine. We just need not to have such a high fatality rate that we do now. So there are hundreds of treatments being investigated, created right now around the world. About half of them are in the US. I think we're pretty motivated. So of those potential treatments and therapies, a lot of them, at least half of them, are things we already have. We're basically taking everything out of the cupboard and saying, we use this for something else. Will it help treat COVID? It's obviously a time saver. We already know a lot of the side effects of our current medications, and they've already been FDA approved in some cases for something else. So that's been a big focus of some of the research, is just what do we have now that might help treat this virus and get rid of it. The main things, I mean, the same stuff that goes on with vaccines goes on with medications that are new. And in these studies, to get FDA approval for COVID treatment, you still have to go through the phases of these research trials. So days 1, 2, and 3, and 4, with 4 being widespread use. So there can be a lot of FDA waivers for treatments if they're helpful, if they look like they're going to be successful. So everything's progressing rapidly. But I just want to remind people there's been a lot of news about medications, and it's not the way science likes to operate, with press releases and news briefings and people mentioning things before they're proven. And that's been tricky. So there's been a lot of ups and downs, and people getting excited about things that didn't pan out. And the reason that happens is that we base our there's different kinds of research and observational studies, which is based on things that have already happened. We just look back and see, okay, of all these people, who took what, be helpful. The best evidence is with randomized controlled trials, where we pick people who are going to get the treatment and then other people who aren't going to get it, and then we compare their outcome. So that takes longer, and it's it's hard when you're in a rush and impatient. So that's our doctors sharing information about this, and how are the treatments, the information about how to be treated being spread around the world. And I'll tell you, kind of crazy, but in the beginning, like back in March, there wasn't any research really. There was just a few initial like news coming out of China about what we could use to treat this disease. And so I was literally getting emails from colleagues every day, forwarding stuff like rumors and just anecdotal stories from ER doctors and hospitalists and people treating this in the ICU, just giving their experiences. And there was tons of stuff like that. Like literally doctors were communicating by Twitter and Facebook and forwarding emails. And then things evolved. Then we started
Which I think we've all been aware of and somehow privy to, because this has all been happening in the open. And so we've seen a lot of social media blow-ups where people are like taking ideas to their doctor based on something that they heard from somebody else, which has been an issue since the internet began, obviously. But on the one hand, there's a negative, right, of this sort of half-baked information sharing, but it's also allowed physicians to communicate in a way that wasn't possible before.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the fact that we can get data from a hospital in China, I mean, not data, like strong data, but just information from hospitals in other countries so quickly it's kind of amazing. At least it plants the seed for like an actual real research study quickly. You know, you find out right away if something works. We're desperate, so we'll take any ideas. Anyways, and then hospitals release their protocols. They keep changing them. So that was all spring, was we would just get like daily updated hospital recommendations to their employees in the ICU and everywhere else about what was working, what wasn't working, what they're recommending. And it constantly changed, and it's still changing. And then we have the professional organizations and groups like World Health Organization, CDC, the American Medical Association, releasing their updates a little more cautiously and with more thorough analysis. So that's kind of how we're sharing our data. As far as specifics, there's hundreds, like I said, of medications being tested. The ones you'd think would be obvious are like antivirals. So, and one medication that everyone got excited about recently because it seems to be pretty effective at decreasing death is called it's called remdesivir. It's pretty new. It was developed to treat hepatitis C and Ebola, but it's decreasing fatality in ICU patients by 62% or so. So that's becoming rapidly one of the standard treatments for severe patients. And there's other antivirals too, like flu medication. You know, just anti-influenza or anti-malaria was suggested, but has not been proven to be effective. That's the hydroxychloroquine. HIV medication, everything's out there, like being studied, because we know it can fight viruses. Even parasite medication, like for lice, is being tested. So it's interesting. And then I know we've all heard of the inflammatory reaction that some people get with COVID, where you have a huge immune response and then your body kind of attacks itself and goes into this cytokine storm. So anti-inflammatories are another focus of treatment, and that most recent a successful sounding possibility is a steroid called dexamethasone, which is great because it's cheap and it's everywhere and we use it all the time in that hospital. They're also studying things like colchicine and some other medications that decrease inflammation. So that's cool. None of these prevent it. They just help it when you get it and if you're severe. There's even studies on vitamins like just vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, because they're supposed to help improve immune function. And then there's some good stuff. Well, they're trying to find if these are helpful, but basically blood thinners, because we're learning more and more about the clotting that happens with COVID. People who get, you know, all these blood clots in their body and lungs, especially, and all over. So blood thinners at high doses in hospital patients are being studied and look promising. And then there's super weird stuff that you guys might already be on. So there's some interesting evidence coming out about heartburn medicine. I don't know if anyone's read much about that. There's Pepcid, which is Pepcid AC, like over the counter. You buy it at Rite Aid, And it's weirdly, in severe patients, it's decreasing death by half. They're actually giving it a dose to people when they show up in the hospital now, just a big dose of Pepcid, and they're less likely to die. So I'm on that already. So woohoo, because that's for heartburn. But also cholesterol medicine is showing some interesting decrease in severity of illness and maybe in death, like just Crestor, Lipitor. Some of y'all might be on that. And then there's other stuff. It's not just medication. We're learning as we go. So they're finding that instead of jumping right away to ventilators, to putting low oxygen patients on the mechanical ventilation, if we can try to hold off and support them with other breathing therapies, and avoid shoving high pressure air into their lungs, they're actually tending to do better. So putting up with low oxygen, because even though it scares the doctor, seems to be improving survival. They're not, anyways, it's interesting. So there's less damage sometimes when you avoid that treatment. And then also putting patients on their stomach, which sounds weird, but they learn pretty quickly, and that was shared pretty fast, that if you had patients lie on their stomach, it pushed the air into their lungs better, and they did better, and they could stay off the ventilator. So all this improvement does seem to be slowly showing up in the death rate. Like, it seems to be going down, and we're figuring stuff out.
Which can be a little obscured by the idea that we're seeing bursts of infection. So now it looks like in the national numbers that we're looking at on the news media, there are dramatic increases in the death rate, but that's really not necessarily about failure in therapies as much as an overwhelming number of people getting sick.
I mean, we have 4 million plus cases, right? So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, our death rate's going to keep going up because we can't save everybody, but it's encouraging that we're learning more now about, I mean, we definitely know more than we did in March. And there's also things you shouldn't do, like don't take ibuprofen. It's weird. And don't take that malaria medicine or fish food. And colloidal silver is BS. So please don't take that either. So, all right, that's about what I got.
So I'm just wondering, Steve, if and anybody else, if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box or open up your microphone. And Andrea, you're getting a little background noise, and actually, I think it's because your internet is a little less secure, or whatever. It's a little flaky. So if you can turn your mic on and off like you're doing, that would be great. Steve, you've had experiences with, developing a response to diseases. Is this kind of confusion that we're seeing so publicly pretty much common even in these less high-profile diseases?
Absolutely. You have only to remember back a little bit in SARS when it hit, the same thing was happening nationally and internationally. It didn't. It's attacked SARS and MERS. Both of those coronaviruses, didn't have the attack rate that this current one does. And so you didn't see it explode all over the world like you're seeing COVID explode. So yes, however, the answer to your question, Reed, is the international community, the science communities internationally depend on open forums to share ideas. That's what it is exponentially burst on the scene in the 21st century. And that's why we have some amazing things happen as quickly as they do happen, because you get this shared pieces of information across all kinds of lines. But yes, it's shared openly, and people like you and me, we're liable to hear many different ups and downs. I can tell you, this virus uses human cell proteins. It hijacks those proteins, and then it hijacks the protein of a normal human cell, and then it uses that protein to replicate itself, millions of copies of itself inside the cell, and then they mature and do the same thing to the cells next door. Drugs have been identified that target that same human cellular protein, but as Andrea said, it's amazing. The drugs that treat cancers, Parkinson's disease, high blood pressure, all attack this same protein area. So they have some efficacy, whether they have, the major efficacy that we want. Usually most of them are eliminated after a couple of weeks of use. So it's just interesting that, the trial and error that's done in the laboratory is now on the national television. You can hear it, see it virtually every day.
Yeah, in my experience in the news media, one of the things we used to talk about when we were trying to decide whether to cover a story was how many people does it affect. So, even if it is involving the increase in the postage stamp, which is not a significant change in your life, but it could affect all of us, does affect all of us, it became news. This is kind of a combination of those two things. It's scary, it's unclear, and it affects all of us, and increasingly shows us how interconnected we are as a world, and how we're going to have to respond to this together.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and I think you might have mentioned a steroid, Andrea, in your earlier conversation. I've seen some internet excitement, which may or may not be justified, about using steroids in response. Have you read anything about that?
Yeah. So one of the medications I mentioned, the dexamethasone, is an
Right.
IV version of steroids. So it's something we've used for decades to treat severe inflammation and immune system overreaction. So that one, which they've gotten excited about, has reduced deaths by 36% on ventilator patients. So it's not a cure, but it's definitely, that's a big improvement. And you can give that to everybody who's on a ventilator. I guess they also are using it just in anyone in the hospital. It's not something we use outpatient because it's an IV. And there's no evidence that giving steroids by mouth to mild people does much or anything. But at least it's one of the tools that we're going to just start routine. They're just doing it routinely now in everybody who's in the hospital.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, there's a group of pediatricians at Emory University and at MIT who have discovered that one of the reasons children don't seem to be as affected by this disease as adults is that children are exposed to more coronaviruses and rhinoviruses as they work their way through the snotty nose era of their lives. Those viruses, they have a slight immune response to this virus because it is a coronavirus. So oddly enough, while the average little snotty nosed kid goes through his or her growth phase, it's gaining the immunization it's gaining some immunity, some slight immunity, which then affects. But
the antibodies are sort of more activated in their bodies.
Right. These discoveries are happening every day as teams are working on the virus. So, gosh, we hear about these things, or Andrea will get a phone call from Denmark that says, "Gee, we just stumbled across X and Y," and boy, it's wonderful, but it's also interesting.
So again, if you have any questions, feel free to either write them. I see that Colleen asked for you to repeat, Dr. Chymiy, the things that have been discredited or that you should not, under any circumstances, take. I know that list could be very long, but you mentioned you.
We don't know enough to make it long. But right now, what we do know is that there's some evidence that ibuprofen worsens outcome. So if you get, I wouldn't worry about taking ibuprofen if you usually do. That's Motrin. If you're taking that, that's fine. But if you get COVID and you have body aches and fever, it would be recommended to take Tylenol instead, because the outcome seems to go better. I forgot to mention because I mentioned that heartburn medicine, which is Pepcid, that seems to help people, and it also decreases your risk of getting it. Weird. So now there's like a total hoarding thing going on. But it does, for whatever reason, seem to decrease your risk of getting COVID if you're exposed. And on the opposite side, which I forgot to mention before, is that Prilosec, which is really common heartburn medicine. It's a little stronger than Pepcid. It's often prescribed, but you can buy it over the counter. Prilosec and Nexium, that whole class of proton pump inhibitors, increase your risk of getting COVID. And we're trying to figure out why, but so those are not ideal. So I have had patients call me and say, I don't want to be on these anymore. Can you switch me to Pepcid? So I have no problem with that. So that's something to at least think about, and maybe ask your doctor if you're in a high risk area, if we get a bigger outbreak here in Bainbridge, maybe we should all switch to a different heartburn medicine.
So is Prilosec or Premazole, or what do they call it?
Yes.
Oh gosh. Okay, I'm on it. So, yep. Okay, thanks.
Colleen wonders about a fish thing you mentioned.
Oh yeah, the hydroxychloroquine, that was kind of a debacle when it was first publicized. And some version of that stuff is in a fish fertilizer, and some people ate it and died. So
don't do that.
Ever. Yeah.
Stay away from fish fertilizer or hydroxychloroquine if you don't absolutely need it for something else.
Yeah. Hydroxychloroquine, we don't love it even for malaria. It has a lot of side effects. So it's not something I would take unless I was told to.
So Steve, go ahead, Venera.
I'm on quite a bit. I came in late, and I'm very sorry. But I'm on quite a bit of medication. You were mentioning some that are risky, I imagine. I've lost a kidney, and I have all these different little aches and pains that I give a lot of wealth to. So, what are you suggesting? Or are you? I take insulin, not an insulin for diabetes, but I take a type of medication for that. Anything I should know different?
So I did mute you, Andrea. You'll have to unmute. But I also want to make clear that we're not probably going to be able to give you actual medical advice here.
Oh, you're not.
Dial a doctor. That's right. What's the point of this?
I'm okay with answering that. We don't know enough to give specific preventative advice, except that just the basics to improve your immune system are important. So, and that's real basic, like trying to have low stress and getting enough sleep and making sure your diabetes and your kidneys are as well treated as possible. There's no daily preventative thing that people are taking, although they're researching the vitamins. So like vitamin C, vitamin D, which I don't think are harmful for hardly anyone, but I can't tell you how much to take. There's just not enough.
No, I didn't expect that.
I would say the other thing, Venera, which is so true for all of us in this age group and anyone really, is our best goal is to avoid getting COVID, which means distancing, which means if you're meeting people, meet them outside and wear a mask. It means just being careful not to engage in large groups, which we all know, and I know you are respecting. And we just have to balance that with the idea of connection so that we don't stress out. So it's a difficult balance, but fortunately, we have years of experience with dealing with difficulty. So we are fortunate to be seniors that way.
Well, maybe for you.
Steve, I want to ask you about the international cooperation, because I know that we've had a lot of attacks on the World Health Organization, and the CDC has been lambasted. Are there, as far from you, I know you're retired, but can you tell if there's still at least communication between these key organizations that's going on to make sure that the information that you said is being collected globally, shared globally?
The answer is an unequivocal yes. There continues to be a great deal of communication back and forth. Scientists don't, perhaps sadly, I don't know. Let me not put a value on it, but I'll tell you, we don't pay much attention to the politics of it. If somebody has a good idea and they're from Wuhan, China, we'll listen to the idea and we will go back and forth about that idea. So it's that kind of collaboration is going on, and in my opinion, that's what's resulting in all the good things that that are happening so rapidly, is that we do have that kind of collaboration. So.
Well, that is comforting to know, I must say. So from your perspective about how this might work, every month we've been getting a little more understanding of the disease and about how it affects people, and more kind of wild syndromes. Do you think that even if we don't have a vaccine by the end of the year, we'll have a better idea about the nature of how this attacks our bodies?
The answer to that is another unequivocal absolutely yes. We know more about this disease every week, let alone months. Data is really strong, and important discoveries are happening in labs and hospitals and clinics around the world literally every day. That's frustrating because it has to go through the rigorous Occam's razor of, is it working or is it not working? Does it work well, or doesn't it work quite as well as we thought? So yeah, we will know more by the fall than we know today, and we'll benefit from from that knowledge. We all will benefit from that knowledge.
So the last question that I know that I would like to ask is, for those of us who aren't in the medical field, but obviously are very interested, and as the whole country, as the whole world is, in these developments, what are the best sources of information for us? Where should we be looking to feel as though we're getting reliable information amid the torrent of unreliable information? Andrea, any ideas?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it's always reasonable to call your doctor's office for one thing. We're getting calls all day, and we're happy to, kind of help you sort it out if you have something real specific that you're worried about. As far as just good information and news, I mean, I'll tell you what I look at. So I look at the CDC. I mean, they deserve a lot of credit. CDC, the World Health Organization, and honestly, just your local health department has a lot of updated stuff. So I look at Kitsap, Health District, as far as, and the state, like Washington State Health District. They're not going to put anything out there that hasn't been vetted and absolutely, verified. As far as like news, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. I don't know what you guys look at, but even all the best news sources can make not mistakes, but just publish things before they're really proven. It's just it's a lot of rumors out there of what's helpful. So that's where we get into trouble, and that's where we get like hoarding of medications and all this stuff happens. But it's hard when, sometimes public figures spread things that aren't accurate. So then it's news. So but if you want accurate, really scientifically proven stuff, look at the health department's information and call your doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, UW, University of Washington Med Center for the pandemic, they publish good data, good, interesting pieces of information. Lots of medical schools, universities, all the big universities that have schools, they stay on top of it as well. So those are good
Okay,
sources.
so there, it looks like just a quick web search takes me to uwmedicine.org/coronavirus.
Yeah.
That's possibly a location which we'll share as well. I'll share a link to those of you whose emails I have about the CDC link, obviously our Kitsap Public Health Division, and we will probably ask you guys in a month and a half if you'd be willing to come back and visit us. I want to thank you very much for taking the time, and I want to thank the people who showed up and brought questions, and we appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.